Elizabethan society is usually characterized by its extravagant fashions, exemplified by Queen Elizabeth herself, its iconic and enduring theatre, spearheaded by William Shakespeare, and its age of discovery, with explorers like Francis Drake leading expeditions to the New World and returning to England with immense riches. If we pause the video here, we might all conclude that the Elizabethan age was unquestionably a golden age. But was it truly? Let's delve into life in Elizabethan society and English exploration and attempt to answer the question, was the Elizabethan age generally a golden age? First, let us examine the structure of Elizabethan society. For centuries, it was common knowledge that one's position in society was divinely appointed, with an unmovable pyramid-like structure ordained by God. Of course, God was at the top, followed by the queen, the nobles, peasants, animals, plants, and then everything else. However, English society experienced significant social change. During Elizabeth's reign, cities and towns like London grew, with the population of England growing from 3 to 4 million during the last half of the 16th century. Yet, 90% of the population still lived and survived in the countryside. This caused the chain of divine appointments to undergo some changes, which didn't significantly impact the poor, but we'll discuss that later. First, let's look at the rise of the gentry, which became a key feature of Elizabethan England. The structure of society in the countryside was led by the nobility, who owned most of the land. Below the nobility were the gentry, who owned smaller estates, then yeoman farmers, who owned even smaller amounts of land, and then tenant farmers, who rented land from the above. Below the landowners and renters were the common folk, who had to work the land to provide for themselves and their families. Unlike the nobles and everyone below them, the gentry didn't belong to fancy families and did not work the land. Instead, they were knights, misters, and gentlemen who lived in the countryside. So, how did this exclusive club grow in size, wealth, and influence? Firstly, Henry VIII's dissolution of the monasteries made about a quarter of the land in England available for purchase, which greatly benefited the gentry. Additionally, increasing wealth from the New World trade and exploration, population growth, and rising prices helped the gentry families multiply their fortunes. Additionally, the Tudor family had become suspicious and felt threatened by some powerful noble families, and so they revoked and gave out fewer titles. The growing gentry took advantage and filled this gap. Notable figures like William Cecil, who originated from the gentry and ascended to influential positions within Elizabethan's government, are a perfect example of the rise of the gentry. This growth in the gentry meant that more people had extra time and money and were keen to sponsor architectural, artistic, and intellectual activities, which became symbols of status. The Statutes of Apparel, passed in 1574, strictly controlled the clothes people were allowed to wear based on their social rank, further solidifying societal structure and limiting social mobility. Theatre, however, was widely enjoyed throughout Elizabethan society as it appealed to people of all social classes. Elizabethan theatre mirrored the social hierarchy of English society. Commoners, known as groundlings, stood in a pit to watch the plays, while the wealthier individuals such as nobles, the gentry, and merchants occupied the higher and more comfortable seats. As extraordinary talents emerged during this period, theatres had to be constructed to accommodate the growing audiences, leading to the construction of new theatres such as the Globe. Notable playwrights of the time included the infamous William Shakespeare, Christopher Marlowe, and Ben Jonson. These plays reflected the society in which they were performed, mirroring the crazy political landscape, rigid social norms, and religious tensions of Elizabethan England. The theatre became very successful because it was cheap to attend and featured various themes, including Shakespeare's historical plays, Middleton's comedies, and Marlowe's tragedies. But it wasn't all perfect. For instance, theatre threatened the government as it was seen as a potential tool for influencing the people towards revolution and misconduct. This led to the increased censorship and requirement for licenses to control the content and messages in plays. Puritans also complained as they believed that theatre encouraged drunken behavior and sinful habits such as prostitution. Yet, the theatre became a crucial part of Elizabethan lifestyle, and plays written at the time such as Romeo and Juliet by William Shakespeare are still widely recognized to this day. Although the rise of the gentry and the thriving theatre scene characterized the Elizabethan era as prosperous and culturally vibrant, many, particularly the laboring classes, remained relatively poor and struggled to survive. Inflation, diseases, poor harvests, rising prices, and declining wages created horrid conditions and challenges for ordinary people, leading some to homelessness and even becoming vagabonds as they wandered around for work and occasionally resorted to begging for survival. There were many reasons for these conditions. Monasteries for centuries provided help for the poor until their dissolution under Henry VIII. Now, those struggling had no support. This, combined with the preference for growing wool instead of food, poor harvests, and population growth, led to a food shortage. England's main export of wool to the Netherlands was also disrupted by the Dutch independence wars against their Spanish overlords. These economic challenges primarily affected the lower levels of society, while those at the top remained largely unaffected. But that doesn't mean nothing was done. The government tried to address the increasing poverty through different strategies and laws, some successful, while others only worsened the situation. Before Elizabeth, measures were already in place to aid the less fortunate, such as charities and the poor rate, a local tax overseen by the Justices of Peace that aimed to improve the life of the poor. The Statute of Artifices, implemented in 1563, imprisoned those who refused to pay the poor rate, and the 1576 Poor Relief Act required the Justices of Peace to provide the poor with wool and raw materials to build with. The 1601 Poor Law Act categorized individuals based on their capacity to work and offered support accordingly. The elderly and the sick, who couldn't work, were sent to poorhouses where they were taken care of, while those who could work were sent to workhouses to sustain themselves. Although not eradicating poverty, these laws attempted to aid the poor and marked the state's first significant step into helping the poor with welfare. Still, the Elizabethan age was definitely not a golden age for the common folk. Let's talk about English sailors and explorations during Elizabeth's reign. After the discovery of America by Christopher Columbus in 1492, English sailors were involved in exploration, colonization, the looting of Spanish ships, the sale of goods in West Africa, and the extremely profitable and unethical slave trade. John Hawkins was England's first slave trader, known for his expertise in kidnapping West Africans and selling them as slaves in the New World. Between 1562 and 1567, Hawkins and his cousin Francis Drake, whom we will talk about in a minute, made 3 trips to West Africa. During these expeditions, they captured an estimated 1,300 African people, transporting them in terrible and lethal conditions across the Atlantic and selling them to the Spanish. These initial expeditions helped to build what we know today as the Triangular Trade, which involves taking slaves from West Africa and selling them to the West Indies, and then buying sugar, cotton, and tobacco to take back to England. Francis Drake, a colleague and cousin of John Hawkins, was a sea captain, privateer, navigator, slave trader, and politician. Motivated by profit, technological advancements, and adventure, Drake embarked on a journey from December 1577 to September 1580, initially aimed at raiding Spanish colonies in the Pacific. Instead, he became the second person to ever circumnavigate the globe, leading to Queen Elizabeth knighting him for his achievements as he had improved England's reputation in the seas and oceans. Additionally, the discovery of direct routes to India and the Far East introduced the trade of spices, silks, porcelain, perfume, and tea, culminating in the establishment of several international English companies. These included the Muscovy Company, said to trade with Moscow in Russia, the Levant Company in the Middle East, and the East India Company, established in 1600. England also ventured into colonization for the first time under the leadership of nobleman and explorer Walter Raleigh. After a successful military expedition to Ireland in 1580, Raleigh gained enormous favor and trust from Elizabeth I. This led to his appointment as captain of the Queen's Guard, the highest office at court. Queen Elizabeth granted Raleigh a royal charter in 1584, allowing him to explore and colonize non-Christian lands in return for 1/5 of all the gold and silver acquired. Raleigh's initiative in securing funding for New World expeditions inspired future explorations and changed England's colonization strategies, leading to increased investments through joint stock companies. In 1592, Raleigh's secret marriage led to his expulsion from court and imprisonment in the Tower of London. Yet, Raleigh managed to regain the Queen's favor as he successfully captured Cadiz in 1597. However, we'll discuss these events in the next and final episode, where we will talk about the conflict with Spain and the infamous Spanish Armada. Thanks for watching.